topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a culture and leadership activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help our clients create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their full potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on their company's mission, which translates to higher profits for you. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or elisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, with me tonight is Tim Vandehey. He is a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter and co-author with about 70 nonfiction books to his credit. He's also the co-author, alongside Dr. Tracy Malett, of Swipe, The Science Behind Why We Don't Finish What We Start, which helps us to understand the science behind why we quit on important life goals and projects and how we can learn to avoid this psychological phenomenon and stay on track to focus and realize what we actually want in our lives. We'll be diving into its contents in today's conversation. Tim joins us today from Kansas City, Missouri. Tim, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thanks, Elise. It's great to be here. And I have to say, go Chiefs.
Okay, we must say it. Go Chiefs. We must. I'm down with that. Yeah. As I said to you before we got on air, I really, really enjoyed your book, your and Tracy's book. I just really applaud what you've done. The research, increasingly this show is really designed to showcase psychological principles that really elevate how we perform and connect. And I got to tell you, I learned so much, Tim, that I hope will help me get my next book written.
Well, that's funny that you say that, because that was one of the first directions we took the questions that led to this book in was looking at, I live in a world of writers 24/7, including myself. So one of the first things I drew on was I know so many writers or would-be writers in some cases who are always talking about the work they're going to finish, but never finishing.
Yep.
And so it's, that's very much a thing. I mean, I have books I've never finished. And so that was one of the questions that sort of led us down the path to this book, because it didn't start out, the book you're holding did not start out as the book you're holding. It started out as something different.
Well, let's just go there really quick. What did it start out as?
That was pretty much a kind of a leading.
Yeah, I got to go there.
Fastball across the middle of the plate. So Dr. Tracy Malett, my writing partner, longtime friend and client, he and I had written 2 other books together about employee engagement, a topic that I know you're very familiar with. And we were at the very beginning of 2020, really before the world shut down. We met here in Kansas City and we talked about a 3rd book. And we were going to do a book about the employee side of the engagement question. The first 2 books we've done have been about the employer side. How do employers keep or attempt to keep their people engaged and meaning, and purposeful and enjoying the work and, staying with the organization. And we had this idea, we had a word, we had swipe, which we looked at as a shorthand for the distractibility of most of us when faced with the infinite possibilities of the smartphone. Really, that was what we came up with. And we liked the idea, we liked the concept, we liked the title. We thought, okay, we can do something with that. And we mapped out a lot of ideas and went our separate ways. And as the pandemic wore on, and as we sort of chewed on the ideas individually, we both kind of reached the same conclusion, which was, this is not just a business book. This is a sort of everybody book.
That's right. That's right.
Because what we saw was all the people, this was people we knew, this was people we connected with professionally, this was stand-up comedians we saw on Netflix and YouTube and so on. Everybody was talking about the same thing. All the things I had in mind to do when I was stuck at home, and all the stuff that I didn't do. I mean, Patton Oswalt has a great routine about it where he talks about, you'd see a man 30 pounds lighter who had become an expert Italian baker and so on and so on and so on. And it was almost a universal phenomenon. And people having all these goals and not finishing some or most or any of them. And we thought, there's something here that nobody's really tapped into. And that's, of course, for me, that's catnip. Because when you're a writer in the nonfiction world, you're always looking for an idea that no one else has really dug into.
Yes.
And no one else had really dug into this specific phenomenon of why don't we finish? It's not the same. It's not the same as procrastination. It's something else.
Yes.
So that was where the book became a bigger book. It still has a strong organizational bent to it, but it's really a book for anybody, because I can't think of a person who doesn't deal with this.
Yeah, no doubt. Guilty as charged. Okay, well, let's get into it. I love hearing about where that came from. That's fantastic. So what I thought was interesting is, at first I thought this was going to be, just this idea of, this swiping. I know what swiping is. Of course, I know what that is from an app vantage point. But for our audience who hasn't yet read your book yet, Tim, would you just define what you mean by swipe? What is swipe?
Sure. So the act of swiping, we call it the swipe as a noun, swiping as a verb, is essentially, it is reflexive, running away from things that we find uncomfortable, disillusioning, frustrating. The reason that we used the word swipe, and the reason that we did not run away from the connection to the smartphone, is because the smartphone is what made us think of it. The smartphone has, as lots of research has shown now, is sort of rewiring our brains to a degree. That's a bit of an overstatement. It's definitely rewiring our attention. It is affecting how we pay attention to things, and it's affecting our perception of our options for where to put that attention. So, because the swipe is an unconscious act, so all the infinite world that resides inside the smartphone over the past, what has it been, 17 years since the introduction of the iPhone, has given us this unconscious sensation that if we're not comfortable with our current experience, it's simply the matter of swiping our finger or tapping an app that we can change that experience. And we've gotten to the point where we do that unconsciously. We don't literally say, I'm not comfortable on this date, and swipe our phone and expect to open our eyes and magically be somewhere else where we're not having a bad date. That would be crazy. But we do it anyway. And one of the best examples is, and I've done this myself hundreds of times, and every time I talk about people with this, I get a chuckle of recognition, which is, if I'm writing something, spending my entire life on, typing on computers, if I'm writing something by hand on a yellow pad or something like that, if I make a mistake, I cannot tell you how many times I have, just for one split second, looked for the undo function before realizing, smacking myself in the forehead and saying, well, there's no undo function, you dope. You're writing by pencil and you have to erase and go back. But for that split second is the conditioning. That's the conditioning that says, oh, I can undo something I'm not happy with a simple flick of a finger. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So that is swiping. Swiping, in the context of this book in particular, is the reflexive, unconscious, instantaneous bolting from an experience where we are currently uncomfortable. And how that affects us in terms of what we don't finish is, finishing things we've never done before is hard. And it can make us anywhere from embarrassed to feeling imposter syndrome, to frustrated, to disillusioned. And in those moments, we quit. Now, frequently we regret it. That's the downside, one of the many downsides. But in the moment, we say, I don't want to do this anymore. And we immediately let it go. We go on to something else, only later on saying, maybe I should have stuck with that workout program because I'd be in shape by now. Or, maybe I should have written those last 25,000 words, I'd have a finished novel by now. We don't get there because we swipe.
Right. Dan Pink wrote a whole book about regret just for that matter for us. Thanks, Dan Pink.
Yep.
So a couple things that you wrote along that line, because I had a whole idea of, why is swiping so problematic? You just laid that out for us. We don't actually realize, our dreams, our goals. But I really appreciate what you also delineated here. Let me just read a couple things that really resonated for me here, Tim. You say swiping equals disengagement from the deep, meaningful experiences of life and work, which inevitably leads to unhappiness and disappointment. I also might add misery. And then the other thing that you said that I really align with, especially as a logotherapist, which is about vitalizing through meaning and the need to be of service to others, is you say human beings are at our best when we're striving, working to overcome obstacles. When our backs are against the wall, that's when we find courage and creativity we didn't know we had. But without that tension and resolution, it's easy to become apathetic and defeatist. Over time, this leads to regret, dissatisfaction, and unhappiness. Amen, brother. That's exactly how I see it as well and talk about it as well.
Yeah. That's a play on, that's a play on the old, but very, very true idea that, growth happens in the uncomfortable.
Absolutely right.
I have 2 teenage daughters. I'm trying to share that with them all the time as far as, tackling new experiences. Like that's when you feel that sense of discomfort in the pit of your stomach, that's a signal to go forward, not to go back. I still struggle with that. We all do. I consider myself, fairly enlightened about my own responses to uncomfortable situations, but I struggle with that. I struggle to make myself remember that, as I think everybody does. But that is the fundamental truth of where we should be and what we give up. Because as I've said, swiping, the things that we want to accomplish that we give up are in general things that we've either never tried before or things that are somewhat beyond our current capacity that we hope we can develop the capacity to do. So a perfect example of that would be training for some sort of event like a race or a marathon, right? When you start off, you don't have the capacity to run that race. Otherwise you wouldn't need to train the way you do. You might need to if you've done one before, but odds are you haven't. Most people I know who've trained for a long race, once they do it, they can't wait to do another one because they realize they could do it, even for something as simple as a 5K. So you have to get into that mode where you're pushing yourself into uncomfortable territory with each and every training run, just a little farther, a little farther, a little farther. And that by definition is uncomfortable because you've never done it before. And it gets even harder when the failures have been repeated, because then people start to fall into fatalism. I know so many writers who, because so many writers I know fail this. They fall into that trap that being a writer equals being a novelist, which drives me crazy. I've never written a novel in my life. I've written all nonfiction books, but
yeah, neither have I. Never will, probably.
And I know people who are not suited to be novelists. They're good writers in their field, but they really, really, they think I have to write a novel. I keep telling them they don't, but for some reason they don't listen to me. They're like my daughters. But they've tried again and again and again, and they keep failing. It's just not something that suits their talent, and they have talent. But the more times they fail, every time they fail, it drives another nail into that coffin of their intention, because they start to believe fatalistically that I can't do this. Why am I trying to do this? And eventually they just give up altogether. And probably they give up entirely. They give up writing, period, because they have this misconception. So, there's a tremendous amount of growth to be had in those areas where we are striving and where we are overcoming obstacles. Getting there and accepting that those growth experiences are going to be frustrating and disillusioning sometimes is really what the book's about.
Well, and the reason I wanted to have you on, Tim, especially once I really understood what the book was about, is that I want to help more people realize that game of life, that one precious life that they have. What do they want to do with that life? Right? So many people are walking through life dead, and they just don't know it. And they're missing so much of their potential. And so what I believe you have done in this book, Tim, is I believe you guys together have created a work that really helps us understand how our minds limit us and how can we actually set ourselves on fire and achieve much more than, say, some of those really extraordinary people who walk the planet actually do. And I think that's a tremendous contribution.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
to do. That's what we hope to. One of the things we hope to do anyway.
I know. I got it. I got it, man. I got the message. I'm in.
We wanted to shine a light on something that nobody else was talking about. One of the challenges in writing this was there is almost no research about this particular topic. So we had to sort of put things together, that were based on attention, and some things that looked at procrastination, and some things that looked at reward and regret. We had to sort of cobble things together because there has been almost no research on this particular topic, which was both attractive and a challenge.
I gotcha. Well, on that note, let's let our listeners and viewers just kind of think about where they might be stuck and missing out on what they really want to accomplish, and grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Tim Vandehey. He's a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter and co-author with 70 nonfiction books to his credit. He is the co-author alongside Dr. Tracy Malett of Swipe, the science behind why we don't finish what we start. We've been talking a bit about where this book came from, why it's important, how all of us are falling prey to swiping. After the break, we're going to get into learning how not to swipe. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I, too, am dedicated to helping to create a world where people realize their potential at work. They're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So the latest one that I came out with was in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders really understand the changed workforce and what it is they really want from you. And then I'm giving you 22 best practices to help equip your culture to create that for them. You can find more about my books at my website, gusto-now.com, or on Amazon. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Tim Vandehey. He is co-author with Tracy Malett of Swipe, the science behind why we don't finish what we start. So fascinating. And what I also appreciate here is that you don't just tell us about how bad this is. I want to talk more about some of the kinds of swipes and things like that. But let's first start with a little bit of hope, shall we? And that is how not to swipe. So you give us some interesting ideas around some swipe insurance here. So how can we not swipe?
That's really the question, right? And one of the that's probably been the most common compliment that's been lovely to receive that we've heard from people who've read the book, which has been, thank you for identifying something that I didn't even know was a thing, and that there's actually that can actually be changed, because the sense of helplessness around this is extraordinary. As I said, the more people try things and fail at them, the more fatalism kicks in. Fatalism is really the final stage of swiping, which is I can't do this. It's really a judgment of oneself. I'm not a writer. I'm not a runner. I'm never going to be able to do X. I'm not a business owner. Swiping affects all kinds of things, including, that's starting that business that you've never started, that sort of thing. There are a lot of sort of base level skills, base level ideas. One of the ones that we talk about in the book is what we call, we use the acronym DAIO, D-A-I-O, which means don't assume you're the outlier. And I'm not going to sing the song because I'm not Harry Belafonte. but it's basically that you're not the only one, that everyone does this. We all do it. Every single one of us does it. But also the corollary to that is there's no one solution that works for everyone. There's no one set of motivations. There's no one set of plans or tools that got your neighbor going on his project, but doesn't necessarily work for you. It is a bit of trial and error. There is no one way to get this right. But when we get to the big picture, there are really two pieces to this that can help people manage swiping. One is to take conscious control of expectations. Expectations are, when it comes to projects, to goals, to purpose, they can be like landmines, and they frequently are, because it's human nature to set our expectations higher. It's based on not just higher, but based on the ideal that we think we can achieve. And of course, if we fall short of that ideal, we're disappointed. If we lose a pound a week instead of 2 pounds a week, well, a pound a week is pretty good. But if your expectation was, I'm going to lose 2 pounds a week, you're going to be disappointed, disillusioned, and maybe quit. There's a whole linear progression of the swipe, and it goes like this. It starts off with what I call page one energy, which is when you first start off doing something, even if you've done it 10 times before, you're fired up. You're convinced this is going to be the time I get it right. That's when the expectations become irrational frequently. And you start off in what we call the downhill, which is you're still fired up. Initially, it's new, it's interesting. It's you're not getting results yet, but things haven't gotten boring yet. You're anticipating the results coming quickly, whether you're writing the first chapter of a novel, whether you're starting a workout program, et cetera, et cetera. And it's easier in the beginning. And then eventually, usually a few weeks in, typically 2-3 weeks into whatever it is you're doing, reality sets in, and you hit that bottom of the hill and start going uphill. And the exultation fades. You've written the first 50 pages of your novel, and you're out of ideas, and you didn't do any planning. So now, what do I do next? Or you've worked out for 2 weeks and you're still not jacked, because you don't get jacked in 2 weeks. And you look at yourself in the mirror and go, what have I been doing for the last 2 weeks, busting my butt? And then it starts to become work, and you don't necessarily feel like you're getting anywhere. And you're huffing and you're puffing and you're on the uphill. You're on the uphill now. And if you have expectations that are not in line with that experience, which is completely predictable, then you are almost certainly going to become disillusioned or embarrassed and swipe. You're going to hit the eject button, what I like to call it, and say, I'm done. I can't do this. And it's a reflexive thing. So managing expectations is critical. Are your expectations in line with reality when it comes to A, what you're going to experience, and B, with what your results are likely to be? It's incredibly important to talk to other people who've tried to do what you're trying to do. What was it like? What was their experience like? What were the hours? How did they feel after a day of writing, or a day of building their home improvement project, or a day of working on starting their business? And what were the results like? How quickly did they start to get fit and lose weight? How quickly did they see a change in the mirror, and so on? Having expectations that are in line with reality, they're congruent with reality, is absolutely crucial. The other half of this is motivation. And motivation is a notoriously unreliable thing. I'm actually not a huge believer that motivation can make that much of a difference for people. However, it can make a difference if your motivation is the right motivation. What we see, unfortunately, is, especially in the age of social media, is people doing things for the wrong reasons. Not because they really want it, not because they're not getting in shape because they want to be healthy, to watch their kids grow up and be able to play sports with their son when he's in high school. They're doing it because of what their friends are doing, or they're doing it because of what they see on Instagram. So the motivation has to be in line with what really motivates you intrinsically, something you're passionate about, something that you're purposeful about, something that you can't not do. And sometimes that is not what you think you're supposed to do. One of my favorite sayings that I throw at my teenage daughters is, stop shoulding all over yourself. You've probably heard that one.
Absolutely.
That word should is a terrible word. Strike it from your vocabulary. Just because you feel like you should write a novel because everyone else you know has, doesn't mean that you should. It doesn't mean that that's the best way for you to spend your time. Maybe you're not a novelist, even though you think you should be. That is a terrible, terrible word. I wish people would stop using it. Mm-hmm. So those are probably the keys in terms of sort of large-scale self-management and self-regulation that people can apply to giving themselves better odds of not swiping.
Okay, got it. Beautiful, Tim. That was extremely well explained. Okay, so as you were going there, what I recognized is you were also helping us a little bit. You got halfway through the hamster wheel, didn't you? So you went down the want, and then you went down the downhill, you went the uphill. So let's go ahead and finish out the hamster wheel. So, ladies and gentlemen, what Tim and Tracy have done is they have really helped lay out just what happens when we swipe. And so you really recognize where you are in the process. So Tim just got us halfway through the hamster wheel. Now, if we take it all the way through, so we recognize what happens what we do with that crossroads. So if you would finish that up for us. Now we're stuck there. We're like, all right, I've spent some time with this. I've toiled and I don't like where I'm going. This looks like impossible. Now we're at crossroads. What do we do?
The crossroads is and thanks for getting me there, because I
got you, Tim. I got you.
Continue down that road or not? No pun intended. The crossroads is the classic, the classic Robert Frost road not taken. So that's the point where you're faced with that decision. And let me backtrack, because decision is the wrong word here. You're faced with that in some circumstances impulse. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between the two. You've experienced that exaltation, that dose of reality in your face, where, oh, this is going to be so much harder than I thought it was going to be, and it's going to take longer than I thought it was going to be. I've told people I'm going to be done. Social embarrassment, a big issue here. And then you reach that point where you are tempted to swipe, where the disillusionment, the frustration, just the difficulty, the effort, reach a critical mass. The difference here between decision and impulse is absolutely critical, because this is the point where, on one branch of this crossroads, you go to the right, you continue doing what you're trying to do. Whether it's bumbling or not, whether you're sure what you're doing or not, it doesn't matter. It's continuing that matters. It's effort and consistency that matters. I mean, personal trainers love to say consistency. The Shakespearean quote, "Consistency, the art of jewel." Consistency is everything. Showing up is everything. On the left is probably not my left when I'm on the screen, but this is my left. Is when you swipe and you say, "You're done." You jump off the wheel. And you quit yet again. The difference there is impulse versus decision. The swipe is an impulse. The swipe is it's an unconscious system, system one, Daniel Kahneman's system one. It's a reflex. It's not something that you're in control of. It's something your brain is saying, discomfort. I don't like this. Eject button, and you're off and you're done. And you do it without thinking about it, and only afterwards do you feel we're back to that word, which is regret. I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to and coached over the years as a writer who have told me how much they regretted stopping a certain manuscript partway through because they didn't know where to go. They put it down. Oh, I'll get back to it. No, you won't. No, you won't. You really won't. You'll move on to other things, and you'll get back to it in 2 years later thinking somehow it's going to be different. It's not going to be different. Not until you change how you respond to these very natural feelings of discomfort. You're going to get the same result. And they regret because if they had kept going, the results would have been completely different. They would have finished something. I mean, that's one of the things that spurred this was National Novel Writing Month.
I remember that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
We started the book talking to one of the founders of National Novel Writing Month, and that exists because finishing something is really what it's all about. It's getting something done. I mean, with National Novel Writing Month, quality is not the issue. Most of those books are terrible. A few of them have been good, but most are bad. That's not the point. The point is writing a 50,000 word novel in 30 days because you want to finish something. It's that's such the holy grail for people.
Well, and the agency that gives for that person across the rest of their lives that they can then activate, that's where I get excited, Tim.
Well, it's a change. I mean, it's an identity shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a novelist.
I'm not a loser anymore. I'm not a quitter. I'm a novelist. Yes.
Or I'm a marathoner.
Yeah.
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner.
Yes.
It's an identity shift. So, going back to the crossroads, the difference comes when we have conscious control and conscious awareness of the precursors to the swipe. The rationalizations and the self-defeating language and all of the clues that this is where it helps to look at what you've done in the past. How, when you're aware of the conditions and the thought patterns and the language that you use with yourself, which is frequently so self-lacerating. I tell people all the time, if you don't want to swipe, one of the ways not to do it is to be kind to yourself. Speak kindly to yourself. Make yourself talk, more forgiving. But when you start to see those signs that you can identify when you're approaching that swipe territory, when you're approaching that same level, that the discomfort is building up until it reaches that critical mass and you slam the eject button. You can make a conscious decision to say, whoa, okay, I know what's coming. I'm not going to do that. Instead of an impulse, you're turning it over to system 2, which is the analytical, the forebrain, the analytical executive part of the brain that's saying, I'm not going to do it because I know if I go down this other road and keep going, yes, I'm still going to feel discomfort, but there is growth at the end of it. And psychologist Tracy knows the exact term, but it's something like project to the end or something like that. I forget the exact term. I'm not a psychologist. But if you look to the end of that path, you can see, yes, there will be other points where you need to keep from swiping. But if I can keep going, I will be changed. I will have a different experience. I won't have regret. I will finish this somehow. Even if I run my marathon and come in last, I finished. Who cares if I came in last? I finished.
That's so
critical.
And that's life changing. And on that note, let's let our listeners and viewers think about that for a second. How can you change your life by following what we're talking about here in this book called Swipe? Literally can change your life. I'm Elise Cortez, your host. We're on the air with Tim Vandehey. He's a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter and co-author with 70 nonfiction books to his credit. He's also the co-author, alongside Dr. Tracy Maillet, of Swipe, the science behind why we don't finish what we start. So after the break, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these things that, the kinds of swipes that you start to recognize, oh, that's me. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I mentioned in the last break that my latest book came out in March of 2023, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you to go along with that is I created a 3-page assessment for you. You can download it from my website, gusto-now.com, and that will help you understand the extent to which your current culture is actually ready for today's workforce. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Tim Vandehey. He is the co-author of Swipe, The Science Behind Why We Don't Finish What We Start. So there's 4 things I want to be sure and cover at this part of this, for this last little bit of our show here, Tim. So the first thing I want to cover just quickly, would you just share a few of the kinds of swipes that you mentioned? And that looks like there's about 6 or 7 of them. We won't have time to go through all of them, but can you just share a few of them?
Sure. Now, a lot of these, number one, were named to be fun and memorable. And
I got that. I totally did. Yes.
Yeah. Number two, a lot of these were named with organizational settings in mind.
Okay.
Because part of this book was intended for people in the workplace, in a career setting. They apply outside the workplace, but I think they're especially relevant in the workplace. So let me just get that disclaimer in there. Let's see. The most common one we talk about is what we call the intimidation swipe, and that's where you're trying something that you feel is beyond your capacity. Doesn't necessarily have to apply in the workplace. It frequently does. Someone is tasked with a project or a role that's difficult for them, that challenges their abilities, and they fall prey to lack of confidence, to imposter syndrome, and they swipe and feel like I can't do this, and they bail out on the project. It also applies to something like, again, writing a book, training for a marathon or something like that. Anything where you feel like I don't have the ability to do this. The doubt creeps in, and then it's probably a lost cause at that point, because it's very hard to recover that when you're doing something that's already hard. The progress through that something generally doesn't make you feel more confident in your ability to do it if your confidence is already shaky. Another one is what we call the ennui swipe, which is you've gotten through the initial phase and now it's just tedium. You're slogging your way through something that was once interesting and fulfilling, and now it is just it's boring. I compare this to when I had to learn to read music. It was really cool at first, and then it was just going through exercises and after exercises after exercises. And I wanted to be able to know how to read music as fast as my musician friends. And it just, that is the point where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. You're this much closer, but it's just so dull and so uninteresting that you can't focus on the goal. So that's the ennui swipe. I've got to talk about the Inspector Javert swipe. Is the one everybody seems to talk about because of the name. And this is one that particularly applies to writers in a lot of cases, but it's when people fear reaching the goal. Javert from Les Miserables, once he caught, or once he found out that that his pursuit of Jean Valjean was unjust over all the years, basically his life had no meaning anymore, and he killed himself. Sorry, spoiler alert. And so this is a case where people are afraid to finish what they have been working toward, because then they have to perform. If you finish your novel, you don't get to be a novelist in waiting anymore. I'm just working on my novel. You get to tell people that for 5 years. Once you finish, you have to show it to people. Oh my God, people might actually read it and give me feedback. Oh dear Lord, no. So that's an unusual one, but it's definitely a real thing. We've seen it in people. And I'll choose one more. I think it's probably I like the trapped animal swipe a lot, which is the one where someone is doing something. This is one of the ones that comes back to motivation. People who are doing something not because it's meaningful to them, but because they think they're supposed to, usually to please someone else or to make themselves look good socially. So it's the kid who's going to law school who hates the idea of law school, or the person moving, relocating to a certain place because their spouse wants to go there, even though they have no interest in going there. That's an incredibly disruptive swipe, because a lot of the time, the things that people are, the goals that people are pursuing under those circumstances are huge. Getting married, going to university, etc., and going in that direction, and then curtailing that can have massive implications for everything from people's finances to their relationships. So that's a tough one.
Okay, that was great, Tim. I think a lot of our listeners, viewers that can really resonate with that, like, oh, I find myself in that. So thank you for bringing it home so they could relate to it even better. So two things left that I really want to make sure and treat. And one is that I love acronyms, right? I love anything that gives us access to do something with an acronym. So, as you said, you did write this book here because you were initially starting to look at employee engagement.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that's a lot of my jam. So, I really like what you came up with here with this acronym that we can actually help employees find, meaning and find connection and engagement in their work through this. It
Mhm.
just takes magic. That's all.
Mhm.
And just magic. And
Yeah.
so will you talk us through your magic acronym here of what that really takes to really engage the hearts, minds, spirits, and hands of people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So magic was something that that's Tracy's brainchild. So I have to give him full credit for coming up with that idea. The acronym was actually, believe it or not, most people don't believe it, but it was fortuitous. Once we arranged the letters in the right order, it became magic. Wow, that's pretty cool. So yeah, but that is the formula for employee engagement, and engagement is one of the antidotes in the workplace for swiping. If you're engaged, then you're going to persist through the discomfort, through the frustration, through the disillusionment. So the M stands for meaning, which is about, again, finding meaning in what's the larger purpose, what's the larger reason that you're doing what you're doing. And these are all things that employers can help employees find through various programs, but it's also there's also things that employees have to be responsible for themselves. They need to seek them out and lean into them when they find them. The A in magic is for autonomy, which is the sense of being self-directed. I'm captain of my own ship. I have some ability to steer myself through my career and make my own choices. And that could be as simple as being self-directed at work. If you're not being a boss hovering over your shoulder all the time. G is growth, which is fairly self-explanatory. It represents the opportunities to grow professionally, to grow in terms of leadership ability, to grow in terms of personal skills and capacity. There should be organizations where people have the opportunity to grow both as a person and a professional tend to be organizations with high levels of engagement. The I is impact, which is people want to see that their work has a positive effect on the world. They don't just want to be, nobody wants to think they're just in a cubicle farm shuffling widgets. They want to see that the work actually impacts other human beings and impacts the world in a meaningful way. And then C is connection, which is connection with the other people in the organization. It's that tribal band of brothers, we're all in this together feeling. So when those five things are present, when those five qualities are present, people tend to stay extremely engaged, and they do not swipe, or at least they swipe much, 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 much less. And of course, today with the issues organizations have retaining talent, that's an issue.
Yeah, beautiful, Tim. I think I'm spot on, totally aligned. Completely love it. Now you've queued this up for us, which I really wanted to take home as well, because I'm terribly geek about this. You may not know this, Tim, but I am an identity and a meaning and work researcher. So the identity piece is really important to me. But then you take it and you distinguish happiness and a meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have to talk about that, because I personally think I align with, I forget what the name of the author is, who says that we're overly fixated on happiness today.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree that we are. So could you distinguish for us the difference between happiness and a meaningful life?
Oh, that's a big one. Well, I think the biggest difference in the context of this idea in this book is, happiness. I consider happiness to be transitory. It's a transient. It's a transient state. I can be happy temporarily if I swipe, because I have temporarily removed the discomfort and the self-doubt and the self-laceration and abnegation that I've inflicted upon myself by stopping doing what I have decided is too far out of my reach. Right. So if I'm, again, going back to the world of the novelist, if I'm 75 or 100 pages into a novel that I've been telling myself for 5 years I'm going to write, and I'm struggling and I'm struggling and I'm struggling and I'm feeling like a fraud, I'm feeling that strong sense of imposter syndrome. If I say, I'm done, forget it. I'm not going to be a novelist. I give up. I make myself happier temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
I have removed myself from that space where I'm uncomfortable and filled with self-doubt or even self-loathing. The problem is it's a transient state.
Right.
Where the meaning part comes in is later on. What does that mean for my identity? It means I quit again. The implications for who I am and what I stand for and what I'm capable of are not great, because again, we're back to the R word. Regret catches up with us eventually. When we persist in something that we care about, our happiness temporarily might go downhill. After this call, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to curse a blue streak by the time I'm done, because I'm going to bust my tail on a hard work, because I'm going to be 60 years old in January and I'm working really hard to make sure I'm a fit, healthy 60-year-old. And that is miserable in the short term, because I'm on the floor in a puddle of sweat, gasping for air, wanting to die. But when I walk home, because I walk to my gym and I walk back, when I walk home, I feel like $1 million. And when I get home, I always get in the shower and I pump my fist, because it would have been so easy for me to walk away and make myself happier for that long, going, man, that was really too hard. I didn't have to do that. But in the long term, I feel better because I don't regret quitting. I stuck with it. I have a stronger sense of my ability to persist and to do what's important. And that comes back to meaning, because that informs my identity. That's about who I am. I become a person who can persist through that discomfort and get things done that are meaningful to me. In this case, my health and fitness. I've become someone who can persist and get through all the books that I have to write, and so on. And meaning lasts. Meaning and identity are persistent, and they last a lifetime. Happiness doesn't.
Right. And I like the distinction that you talk about happiness being in the present. It's temporal, but meaningful life is really in the incorporation of the past, the present, and the future. And it incorporates the harder stuff that we get through, as well as the stuff that's pleasant. And I think that's really important to emphasize.
And it comes back to your story. I mean, not surprisingly, I'm a believer in story. And there's a reason that our best stories about ourselves, travel stories, things like that, are always the stories where something goes wrong. There's an old joke that says, alcohol, because no one ever said, and then I went home. That's part of telling a good story. Or no, they said no good story ever ended with, and then I went home.
Right. That's right. None weren't listening to anyway.
Stories are always where something went terribly awry. Everything went to hell, and we had to find a way to persist, to keep going, to clean up the mess, and come out at the end going, whew, got through that one. The travel stories, the being stuck in the airport for 72 hours, whatever it is. I've had my own travel horror stories. But there's a reason that we tell those stories. We don't tell the easy stories.
That's right.
The easy stories are boring, but also those stories don't reveal anything about us, to us or to others. It's the stories. It's that sense of story that says, I got through this. I survived. I found a way. And those things define us. They define our identity, and they're what shape the meaning we bring to our lives.
Well, and that's what I think the promise of your book is, Tim, that you really have given us a way of first understanding why we, trip ourselves up, and what can we do to intervene in that process. And you talk about this, and I think this is an incredible way to finish a book, that you could really change the trajectory of an individual life and that of society. That's big, Tim.
Yeah, you're really, well, if you think about how many projects go unfinished, how many goals go unmet, it has to be staggering.
Right. Multiply that by just, a family or, a community or whatever. But yeah,
just take the problems we have with healthcare in the United States. If 20% of people who intend to get fitter and healthier.
Yeah, right, exactly. Sorry, Tim, we've totally run out of time.
I'm
Oh
so
my
sorry.
gosh. No, don't apologize. This has been great. But we got to conclude here so we can get on with the next show here and let our listeners know how to find you. So Tim, I'm so happy that I found you. I came knocking on your door, I believe it was. No, somebody sent me your book. Your PR person did. But then I followed up because I wanted to have you. Thank you for being on Working on Purpose. It has been amazing to have you.
Thank you. It has been an amazing experience being here.
Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to follow up with this man, Tim Vandehey and Tracy Malett. Probably the best place to start to find them would be Tim Vandehey. That's Tim's personal site. It's Tim, and then Vandehey is Vandehey. So timvandehey.com. You can also find them at swipethebook.com. If you missed the show last week, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Faisal Hoke talking about one of his books called Everything Connects, Cultivating Mindfulness, Creativity, and Innovation for Long-Term Value. Next week, we'll be on the air with Jeff Wetzler talking about his new book, Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. See you there. And remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.